Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us for this week's Thursday with AARP Wisconsin show. I am Amber Miller, your host, and also the Associate State Director of Community Outreach. Before we get to our special guest today, just as a friendly reminder, you can always check out the AARP Wisconsin website for information on upcoming virtual events, vaccine distribution, finance committee. There's a plethora of information on there, so we definitely encourage you to visit the AARP Wisconsin website on a regular basis. Please also remember, even though we're living in a virtual world at the moment, we are always looking for great volunteers. If you have an interest in volunteer with AARP Wisconsin, please go to the website below for additional information or to apply. As soon as we get your information, we will be in contact with you. And please note, we're looking for volunteers through all 72 counties. Please also remember the AARP Friendly Voice Initiative, which launched last year. This is free. You do not need to be an AARP member, and you can be any age. This is where you could put a request in for yourself or for your loved one to receive a friendly voice on the other end. And this is one of our trained AARP volunteers. You could put a request in for a daily, weekly, or monthly call, but sometimes it's just nice to hear a friendly voice on the other end. And that information could be found below, or you can also call the number that is also below, should that be easier for you. You might not know, but April is National Financial Literacy Month, and it's an excellent opportunity to review and upgrade your financial smarts. So whether you're just starting out or you've been earning your way for quite a while, this show will be right up your alley. So we have two really great guests with us today. So first, I'd like to introduce J. Michael Collins, who goes by Michael, who is a professor of consumer finance and public policy at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Thank you so much, Michael, for joining us today.
Thanks, Amber. Happy to be here.
Thank you. And also Miss Lisa Lamkins, who is the Federal Issues Advocacy Director with AARP Wisconsin. Welcome, Lisa.
Well, glad to be here, Amber, and super happy to join Dr. Collins on the show today.
Yes, absolutely. And if you are joining us live, feel free to post any questions below on the facebook.com page or the YouTube page, and we will be taking them live throughout the show. So, Michael, I'm going to start with you. And so the Wisconsin Saves and also the Governor's Task Force on Retirement looked at a number of savings options, but ended up recommending savings connected to employers. So why the focus on employers, and what about people who are self-employed or gig workers?
Yeah, thanks for that question. And I want to acknowledge too, Lisa was a co-chair with me on a committee where we looked at some of these issues. And so, we spent time with it's a bipartisan task force of people from across the state to try to understand how we can help, especially younger people, but really people at all ages, get better prepared for retirement. And it turns out across the board, when people tell their stories about how they started saving for retirement, it was they saved at work. Pay yourself first. It came out of the paycheck. It was the 1% or 3% or 5% of the payroll that went into these savings accounts. And so that really tends to be the main way that people can save. The problem is a lot of small employers just simply don't have plans, and it's because they're small and they don't have, it's not that the employers don't care, it's they don't have access to good retirement plans. And so partly what Wisconsin Saves tries to do is recommend a statewide platform where people can have access to a payroll deduction savings at work. Now, gig workers, obviously, they are the employer, but they can still participate. So, we do care about self-employed and we do care about gig workers, but the key thing about this is that it's a retirement account that's independently owned by the employee. And so they can contribute whether they're part of an employer or they're on their own.
And Michael, I know this might be the first time that people, A, are hearing about Financial Literacy Month, and B, hearing about Wisconsin Saves, but does a program like Wisconsin Saves make financial education or literacy less important?
I think that there's this myth out there that, if your employer takes care of you, then you don't need to know anything, right? And so if you have a pension or, your employer automatically defaults all of your savings for you, you don't have to know what's going on. But, anybody who's ever changed jobs knows that you have to make a lot of decisions. Like, which do I roll over? How do I manage my accounts? Do I take advantage of this new account with my new employer, or do I continue to support my old account? And then what happens when I retire? How do I manage those funds so that I have the income that I want to have as I age? And so all of that is related to financial literacy. So I would argue that really if the state does do something like Wisconsin Saves, where we do have statewide access to retirement savings, which I really hope we do, that's going to make it even more important for financial literacy, and not just for high school students or for students in college, but at every age, so that people really can make good decisions about what they want to invest in and how to manage that money when they change jobs or they get ready for retirement.
And I'm glad that you pointed out that financial education and literacy is for all ages. I can say that my 6-year-old niece, who's in kindergarten, is learning how to save money, and it just warms my heart, because I'm like, oh my gosh, she's learning at such a young age. That's great, because I feel like when I was growing up personally, my household never talked about money and savings or retirement. We didn't talk about it in school. So when you hit that magic age of 18, 19, 20, and you're on your own, you're just like, what do I do now? And I feel like that's why Financial Literacy Month is so important, because it starts planting the seed at any age to start really kind of making a plan, whether it's creating a household budget or savings and spending plan. Sometimes it's just that little push that you need to be like, okay, I'm going to really start taking my finances to heart.
Yeah, I'll just add that Wisconsin has just recently added some mandates so that high school students do have to take a half a credit or a credit course before they graduate. So it's a graduation requirement starting in a couple of years. So students are taking courses in schools, in public schools now. And then one of the interesting pieces of that is they're coming home and asking their parents about financial issues. And so it has this sort of multi-generational effect where, now parents are saying like, yeah, we should understand how FAFSA works, or how retirement savings works, or how the tax code treats different kinds of savings. So it really does percolate all across different generations and age groups.
And Michael, I know you're going to be talking about some websites, which if you are watching this after the replay, will be in the notes section. But how does Wisconsin compare to other states in terms of financial literacy? And are we behind, on the rest of the country?
Yeah, everybody always wants to know, is Wisconsin keeping up with Minnesota or Iowa or whatever it is, right? So, the truth is that, we're a state where we have a lot of people who are employed, especially, couples where both are employed in the workforce. So we have a lot of people who are, working, but many of them don't have workplace-based savings. And so, we look pretty much like the national average in terms of, so the common thing that is done in the National Financial Capability Survey, which we can share a link to, and you can see the data for Wisconsin specifically, is to ask these 5 basic quiz questions. And people do pretty well on those quiz questions. We do about the same as other people in the country. But, we struggle when it comes to things like making ends meet, or having a rainy day fund, which turns out, particularly having a so-called emergency fund is really critical. And, it's about half of people in Wisconsin who have a rainy day fund, who have some money set aside for an emergency. So, we're doing about as well as the rest of the country. We're doing about as well as Minnesota, but we're not doing well enough. I mean, we've got too many people who are struggling with some of that basic financial literacy and, some of those basic financial resilience tools like having an emergency fund.
And I'm glad that you brought that up, because it also helps prevent people going to check cashing places or borrowing money from friends and family. So I'm glad that you brought that up. And so Wisconsin Safe sounds like it could help younger people get ready for retirement decades from now. And Lisa, we're going to talk to you momentarily about that. But what can people do who are close to retirement?
Yeah, I think that always makes everyone nervous. So when you turn 50, I just turned 50. So, that happens, and you start to say to yourself, am I ready in 12 years, 15 years, 20 years, 25 years? How long do I need to be ready for retirement? So I think one thing to say to anybody who's in that position where they're working, when they're starting to think about retirement, is don't panic. A lot of people are in that position where life has happened. Maybe you bought a house, you financed your kids' college education, and now you can start to focus on you and what it takes to be ready for retirement. So it does happen. It's not ideal, obviously, but we do see people really save a lot in their 50s and early 60s. So they're cutting back, they're working more, they're not spending money on the things like housing and kids. They're not buying new cars, those kinds of things. But that allows them to build up a nest egg pretty rapidly. And so it is certainly possible to, in your 50s, accumulate enough to be able to retire comfortably in your 60s on top of what you might get from Social Security. So it definitely is possible. I think the best advice I can give anybody is to get information, get that financial literacy, get that education. So, I work a lot with UW-Madison and the extension programs that are all across the state through the UW and in different counties. And so they have some retirement planning education. I know AARP has great retirement planning education. There are lots of resources out there that are free. Nobody's trying to sell you anything, that can be great resources. A lot of employers will offer some help. You don't need a full-blown retirement plan. It's really, how much do I need in retirement? How much do I have now? And where in my budget can I start to put away money for the future? It's really, it feels really daunting, but it really is just a matter of, maybe it's $200 a month or $300 a month. How much can I start to put away? And then, when the time comes, you'll be ready.
And Michael, so it sounds like both savers and employers can benefit from ways to expand retirement savings. So what does the state of Wisconsin need to get involved? How can they get involved?
Yeah, I think it's true that anybody can open a retirement account anytime. So whether it's through your employer or on your own, you can have a retirement account. A lot of people right now are getting ready to file. In fact, today's April 15th, right? So it would be tax day. We have a little extra time this year thanks to the IRS's rules. But this is the time of year when people start to think about, should I have an IRA, be contributing to an IRA? The problem is that those accounts are not available to everyone equally. So the cost of having a low balance account is pretty high. You get high fees. The funds that you have available aren't very good, meaning that they don't have great returns, or the returns get eaten up by the fees that are charged, administrative fees that are charged. So imagine if there's, say, 1 million people in the state who don't have good savings options, and they're out trying to find, retirement plans that are high cost. What if we got them all together and pooled them together? We could get way better pricing, right? We could get lower cost per person, better access to accounts. So now it's not, 1 million people with $10,000 accounts. It's, tens of millions of dollars of accounts. So that's really what the state can do, is it can use that buying power to create a pooled investment, more or less, that people can get access to, so that they can get the best possible deal. And that to me seems like a win-win. It doesn't cost the state anything, and it gets savers in the state access to savings that puts more money ultimately in their pocket, and doesn't have high fees.
Great. Thank you, Michael. And so, Lisa, we're talking about, of course, Financial Literacy Month. And of course, it's a good time to educate people about the importance of planning for secure retirement. I know Michael kind of touched on it. So you have a scary statistic about people who think about retirement. And I am very curious about this statistic, because I see it already, and I sort of want to chuckle at how you're going to do this, but it's also very scary. So
it is kind of scary. And I think it really stems from, when we think about retirement, for a lot of us people, it really just means like surviving, kind of getting by. And yet at the same time, the scarier thought is this statistic. 1 in 3 Americans believe in Bigfoot more than they believe that they can retire comfortably. Okay, and I'm not making this up. This is actually a survey that AARP did with the Ad Council. And so, I think what that's telling us is people aren't confident that they have enough saved for retirement, right? They are like, hey, Bigfoot's more real than me thinking that I can retire in 10 years. So I think that's sort of a good way to kind of think about Financial Literacy Month and think, all right, what are the small steps that I can take individually, or what are the steps we can take collectively, like Michael was talking about in terms of Wisconsin Saves, so that, that I don't end up being one of those people who believes more in Bigfoot than in thinking that I can retire.
I will have to say, Lisa, I do believe in Bigfoot, and
I
so
knew
when
you
I read
would,
that,
Amber.
of course I would.
I knew this.
So when I read that statistic, I was just like, it's almost unbelievable. And I think it's because people don't think about the future. When you're in your 20s and 30s, you're maybe career driven or family driven, or, just want to, travel the world. So I found that statistic very interesting and scary at the same time. And I think that's why it's great to have you both on the show today, because it's all about just planting the seed. Even if you could just make, one little change to your budget or thinking about retirement, it's very, very scary. And I know we have one question we're going to pull up, and I think this might go a little bit towards Michael, but Lisa, you could definitely answer it too. So what is a good amount to have saved for a rainy day fund?
So this is a really common question in like the household finance or personal finance world. And so a lot of financial planners and advisors will tell you 3 months of your income. For a lot of people, that seems really large and scary, right? And so 3 months income comes from the idea that, if you were to lose your job, most people can find some income within 3 months. So that's kind of the rule of thumb there. It turns out, if we look at the data and look at when people have a shock, meaning they had a job loss or an expense or a health crisis or whatever it is, typically it's way less than that. Even $1,000 or $2,000 is usually sufficient to help people bridge most of those kinds of problems. So, I often tell people, think about the amount that would make you feel better to sleep at night. A mortgage payment, maybe a car payment, something like that's tangible that you can sort of put as your goal. And so, $25 a month might help you put yourself on a path where you have $1,000 or $2,000 before too long, that you can have as that emergency fund. So, I do think that in the data, we see lots of examples where people never actually use it, but they feel much more secure because they have it. And, having that backstop, so you don't have to go to a payday lender or friends and family, which is what a lot of people end up doing, just makes people feel a lot more confident about their finances.
And Lisa, I'm going to come back to you just real quick, but I do also want to acknowledge that some of our viewers might be saying, after my household budget, I have no money per month to put into a savings account. And I'm a big advocate on looking at your household budget and seeing what maybe you could cut back on. So that's where you have to start looking for the money, instead of saying, I work maybe minimum wage, or, I'm a single household income. Lisa, do you have any feedback either on the rainy day, or maybe some tips and tricks on maybe how people can try to find the money to put in a savings?
Actually, what I was really thinking while Michael was talking was, and it really builds into what you're saying. It can be hard sometimes to find that money. So we know it's saving, is much easier for people if they can do it automatically. So when Michael was talking about this Wisconsin Saves retirement savings plan that we'd love to see the state set up, the task force that worked on this really kind of baked into it the idea of having a little bit at the very beginning, the first amounts that you save kind of available in case of emergency, right? And this really stems out of the pandemic. All of a sudden, people were like, oh my gosh, I don't have a job. Who knows what's going on? For many people, the only kind of savings that they have is a retirement fund. And so we actually really looked strategically at this Wisconsin Saves and thought, well, let's add in a little bit and make it easier, for people to save without some of the strings attached. And so I think that's an important piece to know, is that, that could be helpful. Wisconsin Saves could be helpful in both of these instances.
And Lisa, so we're talking a little bit more about retirement, but what is one easy step that people can take to educate themselves about retirement? So they're listening about, I'm going to create the household budget, but now all of a sudden it's like, I need to start thinking about retirement.
Well, and I think some of it is, really just not to get overwhelmed. And so sometimes a very simple step folks can take, particularly if you're reaching that retirement age, and hopefully AARP already sent Michael about 50 letters, saying join AARP because you've now reached 50. If not, we know where you are, so you can expect to hear from us, Michael. So you're 50 and all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, I'm overwhelmed with this. What do I do? One of the first steps is to really figure out the base of what is retirement for many people, and that is your Social Security, right? I mean, for a lot of us, and for too many people, it's the only thing they depend on. It's really not enough. But it's a really good start if you know, well, where do I start? Where do I stand? What's my Social Security benefit going to look like? And I will make a plug for AARP's Social Security website, because it's cleverly named aarp.org/social security. I see it's up on the screen now, but there's really a lot of good information there. There's a benefit tool. You can calculate your benefits. There's tons of Q&A. If you are a registered user on aarp.org, you can actually submit a question to our experts and they'll give you a personalized answer on your own situation. So there's tons of good stuff around Social Security on that page. It also doesn't hurt to actually, go ahead and set up an account on the official Social Security website, which is ssa.gov. You set up your account and you can get different models and different projections of what your Social Security benefits would be. And so, sometimes just taking an hour one day and going and, dinking around on the different websites and seeing what Social Security might have in store for you, I think can be just a really good place to start without getting overwhelmed.
And I also want to plug another resource that we have through AARP, which is the AARP Money Map. If you have not been on it, we definitely recommend it. We actually had the folks from AARP Money Map on one of our shows, I think earlier this year, if I'm not mistaken, and really cool, interactive, and free, but it's a way that you can either talk about retirement, and then there's also a map where you could talk about debt reduction, which I think is another avenue that people can maybe start looking at, especially for financial literacy month. So that website was below. And so Lisa, so we're in a retirement crisis. I know we talked a little bit about the pandemic too. And there are some who say if people only knew more about finances, or if we did a better job of teaching financial literacy, which, oops, I did mention that earlier in the show, I apologize, that would be the solution, of course, the end all be all. So what is your take on that?
Well, it's clearly, one important prong, but it's really not the answer. And we have far too many people who are saying, oh, if individuals just knew about this, they would go on their own and they'd open that IRA, right? Michael is talking about, okay, all these things exist, but the fact of the matter is that people are not going out and opening their own individual retirement accounts. In fact, we've seen the statistics show only about 1 in 20 people go out and do this. So, why aren't people doing it? It's not because they don't necessarily know about it. It really comes down to access. And that's what this Wisconsin Saves program that Michael was talking about really gets us, around this notion of access. We've got close to 1 million people in Wisconsin who don't have access at work to save for retirement. And this would just make it easy. It'd make it easy for employers who want to offer these plans. It'd make it easy for savers, for employees who want and need to be saving. And so I think it's one of the best things we can do is kind of remove some of those barriers. And it, in some ways, while you certainly need to educate yourself about what it means, you also don't have to be a rocket scientist and kind of be scared and nervous that you're going to make the wrong choice. With a program like Wisconsin Saves, there'll be a couple of easy selections by default. You're going to retire in 2030 and you pick a fund that is a target date fund for 2030. You don't really have to think about it. Oh, do I put this much in bonds? Do I put this much in equities? Do I do real estate? You don't have to know that. You can know that. That stuff is good. You can, there are other things you can do. But I think this sort of Wisconsin Saves program would make it easier for everyone and would really help with that access piece.
Absolutely. And it looks like we're going to be wrapping up just momentarily, but it does look like we have a comment from one of our viewers. So Tom says funds in a Roth IRA can also meet some of the rainy day emergency needs. Michael, do you have any comments on that?
No, that's exactly right. I mean, when people say, where should I put my emergency savings, Roth can be a good example because it's, it's after taxes. And as long as you're not withdrawing the earnings, you can withdraw what you contributed with no penalties. And so it can become a good source for that. In fact, part of what Wisconsin Saves tries to propose is that built-in emergency savings component as well. So, we don't think enough of emergency savings and retirement being sort of two peas in a pod. We need to have the emergency savings to protect our retirement savings, but we also need to feel confident enough that we can put money into retirement and not have to worry about these present shocks. So it really is important to think about both those things together.
And if you are joining us or in the replay, make sure to check the notes for the show, as we will reference all the websites that Lisa chatted about and also that Michael chatted about. And I want to thank you both so much. I know you guys are super busy, but we appreciate you coming on, talking about your expertise, especially with Financial Literacy Month. It's a very important month, but also it's something you can do every day. We don't want you to think that any other month you don't have to think about retirement or savings or budgeting or anything like that, but I think the resources and the websites that we will be providing is like a really great first step if it's something that you haven't thought about. So thank you guys so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. And thank you guys so much for joining us today. Before we end the show, of course, I would like to plug some upcoming virtual events that are either hosted by AARP National or the AARP Wisconsin website, office. So we have stuff coming up in the next 2 weeks. So Sisters from AARP. We also have the AARP Lacrosse Disrupt Aging Book Club. Geology Bingo. So definitely that should be fun. We're excited about that. And then on the 21st, a conversation with Damon John. So this is really great for entrepreneurs. You can go to the website below or call the 1-877 number if you would like to register. Also keep in mind that the Small Dollar Big Impact Grant application will be due on April 21st. If you recall, these are small grants available to organizations, communities that are looking for up to $1,000 for a really fun, creative, innovative idea, and that application is due April 21st at the website below. Join us next Thursday, as not only is it Financial Literacy Month, we love to celebrate our great volunteers. So we're going to be talking to a few of our star volunteers next Thursday for National Volunteer Week. So you could join us back here next Thursday at noon on our Facebook.com page or our YouTube page. And as always, please feel free to share this video on your social media, as the more information we can get out about Financial Literacy Month, then we're just helping one more person in our community. So I want to thank you again so much for joining us, and until then, be safe.